All right, so welcome to Assets and Algorithms, the show where we explore the intersection of real estate and technology. My guest here today is Jeff Weinberg from Drexel Properties. Thank you for joining me today, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I think you are really positioned well in the Chicago market, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation and hear about some of the things you have going on. So I'd like to start just by asking you, as president of Drexel Properties, how do you see your role influencing the company's growth and culture, especially as you guys have seen this expansion?
It's ultimately, I see sort of three arms or branches of what it takes to run and grow a property management company. For starters, a property management company is a service business. You're responsible for valuable hard real estate assets, but ultimately you have residents that live in the building. They come and go. They open doors and lock them behind them. They have appliances, electric, and things need to work and be pleasant and easy for them. So it's a high touch, high service business. So one aspect of the business is just managing all of those residents on their daily needs. And then when they move in, when they move out, and everything in between. So the second component is the resources within the company that touch those tenants in all sorts of different ways. If something breaks in their apartment that needs to be fixed, they get locked out of their apartment, or just keeping the properties clean and looking nice for the communities that they serve. So there's the employee aspect, and because it's a high touch people service business, there's a lot of time and effort that needs to be placed on nurturing and encouraging and growing people. So the culture within the company itself is critical. And then the third component, and I'm in Chicago, which has a lot of restrictions and a strict residential tenant ordinance, but it doesn't matter where you are. There's ordinance and laws and legislation, and particularly in Chicago. There's a large element of protecting the industry and from the perspective that, the landlords are evil. I'll say this for a broader audience. We are housing providers, not landlords. We're not lords over anything. We're providing a service. So that means that within the communities that we operate, you need to be involved with the legislation that's going on that is both going to protect residents because they do have rights and expectations that need to be met. So there's obligations as a housing provider to meet those, but there's a mismatch or disconnect between legislators and elected officials and what the role of a housing provider is. So that's a third component to really make the whole thing work, or at least in the way that Drexel Properties operates and the way I manage everything at a very high level. It encompasses all of those things essentially to work with certain harmony.
Absolutely. I love that answer. I think, being a housing provider is the best way to describe what you guys do in service to the community. So let me ask, what does a typical day look like for you? And how do you balance all of the day-to-day operations of managing those properties? And are there any specific tech tools you use?
Well, I'll give a short answer on a typical day, and then I'll talk about the tech tools, which I think is a bigger focus of this conversation. But um, ultimately, there's not a typical day. There's typical issues that need to be dealt with. So on a typical day, I'm making sure that we are responding to the tenant needs and managing over 1,000 units. So somewhere there's some challenge somewhere. Sometimes it's a real issue, like there's a gas leak and it's in a wall, and it's a real tough situation to figure out. So we've got a lot of heads trying to solve it. Other times it's a human resource issue within the company, or sort of social worker capacity as a property manager. So there's those things that you have to deal with every day. So those boil down to managing work orders. But then there's always something related to an insurance or a payroll issue or some kind of property tax protest issue. And then we're also nurturing and growing our third party management. So there's constant conversations with brokers and lawyers and title folks and various people in the industry that we're trying to work with to grow business. So that means we're also doing speaking engagements and writing thought leadership pieces. So all of these things flow into every day that I work. So there's common things that I'm doing every day, looking at the key performance of the business. But then within that, there's new priorities where every day is different, which ultimately makes the business fun and rewarding. In terms of technology, maybe I'll start out by giving a real quick arc of both my background and then technology within my business. I started Drexel 23 years ago. That was after spending 15 years in information technology. So I worked for a consulting technology services company. I worked for a couple of dot-com startups in the late 90s into the early 2000s, and I started Drexel in 2002. Actually, 23 years ago, more or less today, when I started. Um, and I was buying my own buildings, but managing it was paramount to success. So technology was a component of that. I started the business. So what do you do when you start a business? You need QuickBooks. So I went out and bought QuickBooks. And I spent a couple weeks trying to make QuickBooks work, and I really didn't have too much of an accounting background, certainly nothing in QuickBooks. And it occurred to me somebody else had to have done this before. So I looked out on the internet, and I sure enough found some guy who made QuickBooks work for him, and he had a template, and I borrowed it. And it worked pretty well when I had 20 units and 50 units. But when I got to 100 or so units, it really started breaking down to really be able to keep track of all the priorities like lease renewals and when an apartment's becoming vacant and rent collections. So I did some research in the marketplace, and I ended up licensing a product called Tenant Pro. And it was a client server platform, but it ran on one computer acting as the server, and we were on a little local area network running that. And it got to the end of its life cycle, and it was time to search around. It was clear, in fact, the product was gone by about 2015. But in 2014, I decided to migrate to AppFolio, that I'm still on that platform today. And when we installed that, it was a total game changer for things like when we scheduled a showing with somebody to give them a tour, we would have to hang out at the building and wait for them to come or not come, which often happens, and just spend an inordinate amount of time additional to just the simple showing, waiting for showings and having the no-shows, or things like when you create a lease, the tenant is signing the lease the day they're moving into the apartment, which means that you've got to spend time with them while they're moving in, reviewing the lease, going through everything, making sure they understand it, all the details. So two total game changers were that now all of a sudden we had a system where we were scheduling tours through a system that text messaged people. So they got a text saying that we're going to show you the apartment at 123 Main Street on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. They have it in their text, so hopefully put it in their calendar. 2 hours before that meeting, they get a text saying, automated, not by a human, saying, reminder, you've got this tour coming up in 2 hours. Please respond, confirm or deny. All of a sudden, 80% of the people that weren't going to show up gave the courtesy of saying denied. So you knew right away you didn't have to show up. So now all of a sudden, you're going to a showing, people are going to show up. So you're not wasting time, and you could show up just in time because you're communicating. On the lease side, we started sending leases out as soon as we approved them. So we're sending the lease out. We're sending leases out today for people who are moving in July and August already. So we have the leases signed well in advance. They have time to review it on their own. So they actually do review it and ask questions more than ever. But the other game changer related to that was we instituted a policy. You sign the lease and you pay your first month's rent. So now all of a sudden, when they're moving into the apartment, they've already paid their rent. So we know they're going to show up. They've prioritizing to show up. And now we could spend our time with them, showing them what they need to know in the apartment, like change the filter every quarter for the HVAC units, make sure you clean the lint trap out for the dryer if you have an in-unit washer dryer. So it makes it much more productive and much more efficient. And there's many, many other things that it gave to us. So probably the overarching thing of all of that was that because now all of a sudden we were software as a service platform as opposed to client server needing to be in the office with an app on the phone. Now all of a sudden you could be anywhere, work anywhere. So you're getting a work order from a tenant or an inquiry from a prospect. You're engaging with them real time from wherever you are. So it absolutely changed everything that we've done. I'm going to carry this a little bit further. I know I'm talking a long time, but what's kind of fascinating is in 2014, we were relatively early adopters of AppFolio. With my technology background, we leveraged every single aspect of it. We really pushed it. We were expert users. The product has come a long way in the last 11 years. And what's interesting is now I do find myself a bit of a lagger in some things, and I'm sure we're going to get to this, but there's things that I'm not using, I'm not taking advantage of as I should be. And a lot of it's because, I don't want to say old and lazy, but because I'm old and lazy. So there's a lot of things that we're doing currently right now that I think are going to leapfrog us forward.
That was a great answer. I think you covered a ton about some of the ROI you've been able to get, how it impacted your growth, how it impacted the tenants that you've been able to serve with better communication. They're more educated. And I love that you have that background. I love that you're an early adopter. Because you do have that background, you've had that experience, and things are changing so fast right now. I wanted to get some insights for you. What do you think the next 6 to 12 months could look like? What technologies are you keeping an eye on that you may want to implement, and how do you see that changing the industry?
That leads into the exact second half of my talk now. We've been looking at lots of things in terms of the bottleneck of our business, the things that require a lot of human activity that could easily be automated. For example, things like we know when leases are expiring, there's a little bit of intelligence that needs to go into how much we're going to change somebody's rent for their next renewal. But once you know what the new rent amount is going to be in their renewal, there's like 20 steps that take place between sending that out and getting it back countersigned renewal from the resident. In Chicago, we have 120-day notice that we have to give to people, which is an inordinate amount of time. Super interesting discussion as to why that is, but it is. The challenge is they don't need to tell us until 60 days out. So we've got 60 days in between, but we figured out when the city instituted this 120-day notice, what could we do to incentivize people to tell us 30 days out so that we know well in advance whether they're staying or going, or at least if they're staying. And the more we know that people are staying, or the sooner we know they're leaving, the easier it is for us to find the next tenant. So we have this whole complicated process where we discount their increase if they let us know before 90 days out. Otherwise, that discount goes away and the price goes up. We want to encourage them to sign up early, but that requires a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls. And then after the 30 days, we've got to change the price and notify them again and then keep pushing them. All of that right now is done by a property manager running up a report, seeing who hasn't signed it, clicking on them, sending them a text, giving them a phone call, reissuing the new renewal, and going through that whole process again. So we are working right now to automate that whole entire process. There's things with showings. The way that we operate is, and again, on the back end of renewals is leasing. We say that leasing begins with renewals. We strive to have no vacancies, so we're showing apartments before they go vacant. So after we know that they're not renewing, now we have to show their apartments. But we manage 75 buildings. They're all on the north side of Chicago, but they're on average 20-unit buildings, and they could be 4 or 5 miles away from each other. So when I'm a property manager and we try to group the buildings together, but they're not always that close. So now I've got a clean slate for next week for a new unit that just came available, and I start getting inquiries. Well, I could show that anytime after 11 o'clock. Tenants are in there, so I don't want to go too early. So I could show it any day, but the first one chooses to go and see it on Thursday next week at 2 in the afternoon. Well, now I'd like to do as many of the next showings that I schedule around that same window. So I only have to go once, and I'm not interrupting the tenant that often either. But now I've got another unit that I'm showing that's 3 miles away. I need time to get to that one. I certainly don't want to go back and forth. So right now, again, scheduling all of that today is a completely manual process. I have to self-schedule all of those with the tenant. So in that area, we're looking at, and I'll get back to more details on this, but we're right now looking at building some technologies in the AI realm that will do this for us so that we could allow tenants to self-select what apartment or when they want to do the showing, so that when the first person goes, they could do it any time. When the second person goes, it sees when the schedule is for that unit, and it encourages the person to schedule it in that slot. If that slot doesn't work, it will only give them slots available that aren't in conflict with other showings in other locations. Again, our property managers are spending hours every week just managing that activity that, again, once automated, it gives hours of time back to the property manager. And the results of all of this are twofold. One is the main objective to provide great service to our residents. So it allows the property manager to focus on that rather than scheduling tasks. And two is to be able to manage more units per property manager. Those are a few examples and the immediate examples of things that we're working on today, right now.
That was a really, really great explanation of how that process can be automated and how what type of value it impacts for the property manager and for the clients. Because once they don't have to worry about that scheduling, I'm sure that they're more focused when they show up to these appointments. They know that the person is more serious and they're able to do a better job overall. So that's amazing. And I think that's one of the greater things about technology and real estate is really optimizing those communications. So let me ask you, when it comes to these technologies, implementing them, you sound like you have a really good handle on the successes and the challenges that you guys are coming across. Let me ask, which metrics are you most focused on improving to ensure both tenant satisfaction and property manager efficiency?
Well, it's an interesting question because there's two groupings of metrics. Truly at the end of the day, we're running a business, and property management and apartment building, multifamily apartment building is a small business, is a margin business like anything else, right? You buy your goods, you buy your components to build whatever it is that you're selling, and then you sell it for something more than that, right? You have a margin. So this is a margin business. When you really talk about it, you're talking about running a business. So you're talking about profitability. So you're talking about net income. So, the key performance indicators that we look at internally from an operations and financial perspective are just like occupancy, turnover rates, rent roll, and rent growth. But more than rent growth is net income growth. So there's a lot of focus on growing those numbers, and the focus on that is through efficiency. There's another aspect of it which I try to separate out because it's important to have an understanding that as a housing provider, it's a tough spot in that we're providing a service, we're providing people with a home, but that home is essentially the product. But then there's also just issues in terms of housing as a human right and being fair in housing and being affordable and all of those things. And all of that, the much more softer type of things, but resident satisfaction is paramount to the success of the business. Low turnover is important. Tenant referrals are important. That's what really drives the business. So we are constantly touching our tenants and asking them, how are we doing? What could we be doing better? Didn't really talk at all about work orders. I mean, there's a whole other element in there that we're also working on for what we're calling smart maintenance that will simplify and help the resident get to what their real problem is before any person touches them. So the person that comes out is actually focused on the problem, not the symptom. So this is all to say that we're also constantly measuring customer satisfaction and also just how we're viewed within the community on a larger scale.
And I love that answer. I think looking at it holistically allows you to really serve better, right? And be a better provider for the tenants. And at the end of the day, that approach also allows you to impact the bottom line. So wonderful, Jeff. This has been a really amazing conversation. I want to end it with just asking you, where do you envision Drexel Properties in the next 6 to 12 months? And what steps would you say would get you to achieving that vision? Absolutely. I love that answer. And I love that you guys are implementing tools like Lively to drive that growth, right? Because I think technology will really help not only property management companies, real estate companies across the board drive growth in the coming years. Thank you, Jeff, for all of your insights. Thank you for joining us today. I'd love to give you the opportunity to share where people can find you if they want to reach out to you, if they're, looking to have a conversation with you or rent one of your apartments. Sounds amazing, Jeff. Thank you again for joining me. And this has been another episode of Assets and Algorithms.